Hi, welcome to Learning Leaders Spotlight, the podcast where we interview the learning leaders of today to help the learning leaders of tomorrow. I'm Leanne Langford, your host. I work at Training Pros, and Training Pros is an L&D staffing company where we put consultants to work with corporate employers to help them complete their projects. We like to say, when you have more projects than people, let Training Pros find you the best consultant to start your project with confidence. Today, I am really excited to have as my guest Tomislav Vujec, the Director of Learning at Red Hat. Welcome, and did I say that right?
You said that perfectly, Leanne. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, well, I'm thrilled. So let's just get right into it. Can you give our audience a 60-second overview of who you are and what you do?
Okay, let's try to fit it in. I'm a director of learning at Red Hat. This has been my role in kind of a learning field for the last 15 years, even though my career with Red Hat goes further back as I started, it'd be around 23 years ago. In that role, I lead our learning function in the organization. Over time, I had various responsibilities within that function. Lately, the biggest drive that I'm leading is kind of a transformation of our organization from more a traditional learning into more focused and targeted skill development.
That's a great summary, and I think you made it in 60 seconds.
Uh,
What first attracted you to the field of learning and development?
I think I got to go with the values and outcomes. It really is, if you are passionate about success, if you're passionate about bringing value to the work, what better way is for that value to be brought up to the world than helping others gain and equip themselves in driving that further. It almost feels like fueling an exponential impact. If I do something by myself, no matter how much effort I put into it, there's definitely a limit to what I can do by myself. But if I equip others and they get on board, they get the relevant skills, they get the relevant knowledge, they're able to do so much more. So it's kind of a combination of having impact that's not always direct, but having an impact with helping other people.
So I've not heard it put that way, but you're right. I mean, so if I can create some kind of program that it can increase everybody's sales by this much, I've made a huge difference than just doing my own little increase in sales. And for any kind of training, that makes a big difference. I can see that. What are the biggest changes you've seen in learning and development in the last 5 years?
But let me take just a little bit of a step back because I think there was always change, like a change in the environment, in particularly in learning over the years that I've been in the field, but even before from what I've learned, it's an area that experience some level of change. I do think that actually the pace of change, especially in the last 2, 3, 5 years, has been accelerating. And it has accelerated in particular in the learning field when it comes to adult learning and corporations. Because what I would traditionally see in most of learning organizations, talking to my peers, having opportunities to compare and contrast, more often than not, learning organizations were focused on onboarding and bringing associates in. Yes, there was always an important element of continuing education, but I would say it was almost like a 80-20 split. We needed to get new associates ready to kind of full productivity within the company. What shifted is because of that increase in a pace of change, suddenly the continuous education started gaining more and more importance because our associates, our managers need new skills to operate in your work. Let's just think about it. ChatGPT did not exist 2.5 years ago. Now it's kind of something that's being used in every field for every possible purpose. That change requires a learning organization to shift more resources on how to develop not just new associates, but how to develop entire organization. Entire segments of the organizations are needing particularly important functional skill that will help them survive and drive their business forward. And they cannot just rely on associates picking it up by themselves. And that kind of shifts that focus from what do we do in onboarding? What do we do while we have associate attention for the first 30, 60, 90 days, maybe, but then we're lost. Maybe they come back, maybe not. Now it's more about how do we target learning? How do we get associates to reskill, to support where their function is moving, as opposed to using that onboarding more of an element of how do we develop culture and motivation so that associates understand learning development, skill development as a critical piece of their day-to-day work, not just something they have to do at the beginning.
That is a lot of changes. You're right. Um, so where do you see us going then in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, I see us really doubling down on that. And what I'm seeing is major both innovation driven changes, as in I previously mentioned ChatGPT, large language models, AI in general, kind of impacting some of the change and driving some of the change, but also that strategic shift of needing to reskill. So what I'm seeing is shifting how we do work traditionally. I mean, for many of us, it's not necessarily same across all of the industry, but in particular, when I think about my company in the technology industry, we could rely significantly on instructor-led training and that kind of model of learning that allows both for practice and the content to be delivered. However, it's not scalable. It's okay if you only need it for new associates. Yes, you can scale for that. But if you suddenly need to develop larger sections of the organization, you need to start figuring out different modalities. And it's not just, it's not the old world of ILT versus e-learning. I think the new world is a plethora of things that are in between, because especially as we focus on skill development, practice becomes of critical importance. And we have to learn ourselves as a learning organization on how to motivate, how to drive, and how to implement that practice without having the tool of, let's grab 15, 20, depending on the size of the offering, associates into a room and work and practice with them for 2 days. We don't have that. How can we make them practice? And how can we bring that critical element of skill development in? So that's where I really see that change continuing to grow in the future, really.
It's interesting. Yes. So I haven't worked in corporate L&D in a long time, but I remember the practice automatically, if we had to do things that involved practice, had to be face to face. But that was a while ago. So, and nobody's face to face anymore. What we're doing here on a Zoom is the most face to face I think most of us get anymore with our employees. And
Yes. Yes. And no, you're right. And figuring out those hybrid approach that actually scale. What does that collaboration and practice looks like if it doesn't happen face to face in the office? And if it doesn't even happen over Zoom, like we're doing it now, it has its own, pros and cons compared to the traditional way where we would just grab a room in the office and discuss something. Maybe we had a whiteboard. Now we have different tools that we use when we're on Zoom, but we need to go further because the scale of it that we need to address is much wider. And depending simply on people reading through the content is not enough. So that practice then requires us to explore areas for asynchronous collaborative practice. It explores us other venues and modalities, like how does that collaboration and really practicing a skill look like if it's done over a chat. And I do want to differentiate, because it's obviously going to be different if we're talking on one end of the spectrum, like a strong, tangible technical skills, and on the other end of the spectrum, an area that frequently changes its name, but that I like to call these days human skill. And where we're talking skills that are based on interaction with other humans. Modern interactions expand outside of what we were used to when we were all working in the offices and when we were all seeing each other. It also opens the doors. It opens the doors of better inclusion when we're talking particularly on a global scale, collaborative exercises and working together on projects. I'm lucky to work for a very global company where our associates pretty much span the world. And you can imagine if your team sits from, I don't know, Hawaii all the way to Australia and has people in between in Europe, in US, well, you're never going to be able to have a team meeting that's live unless you're willing to accept that someone's joining it at 3 a.m. So what do you do in that? How do you create a practice within that framework that is interactive, that helps people build those skills, and yet does not require that traditional element of, hey, we're all in the same location and we can practice it out there? It's a challenge. I don't think we have all the solutions just yet, but there's that other impulse that I mentioned earlier from technology innovation that keeps bringing you things that we're testing out. Some of them working really well, some of them perhaps not so much, but I think that's what we're going to be observing, implementing, experimenting with as we go forward and figuring out best methods to actually address that.
I think that you're right. And I think that what's going to be coming is exciting to think about. I can't wait to see what kind of solutions we come up with for, as you said, these global teams where nobody's in the same time zone at all. Let's switch gears a little bit. Can you talk about your most influential professional mentor you've had?
Most influential professional mentor, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be mentored by many really great leaders and individuals through my career. It's a it's a set of people who were both leaders at the company that I only had indirect relationships with, to many managers that I had great opportunity to work for. It's hard to point one person from that. So I'm going to go more to mentors who were very indirectly mentoring me and really did that mostly through sharing their thoughts. So basically what I'm talking about is some famous people that I'm really looking up to, and three that I would like to definitely list here are Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, and Adam Grant. People who have TED Talks or podcasts that I like to follow, books that I like to read, and often get some critical lessons on leadership from.
You know, everybody needs a mentor, and I like the ones you've chosen. Those are great. They have some great information to share with us. Um, what skill is the most difficult for you to find right now in people you hire?
It's kind of a non-traditional skill for, I think, area of learning and development. If you're looking at a full span on how the industry existed, even though learning was always connected to measurement, but the skill that I'm particularly looking for is the skill of data science. And when I say data science, I kind of thinking almost as a jump board for the larger universe of artificial intelligence. And really, that skill is really hard to find for. There's absence in the market of that skill. in general, but also building the knowledge and understanding and kind of foundational level on that skill across of different sets of learning and development roles is critically important. And the reason being, like I said earlier, we're addressing larger swaths of organizations. We're finding the ways for them to upskill, reskill, go to different areas and address what is important for the business right now. Kind of hard to figure all that out just by counting on traditional models that would explore those possibilities through, leadership hierarchy or whatnot. So having the data science base for learning to be able to do predictive analytics, to be able to infer skills and skill gaps is of critical importance. Finding that skill in your traditional L&D people often enough is the skill that we focus on developing. And then in some occasions, we do get people who come with that skill, not necessarily being learning professionals, and we help them develop on that learning and development side while they're bringing that skill. But I would say that's the hardest skill in the market.
I'm going to agree with you. I think the data science or the ability to do the data analytics, not something that draws people to this field. We come to this field because of connection and community, and maybe we like to be up and talking in front of people with all different things, but not usually because we love data.
No, you're right about that. And let me add an element to it. For me to be able to stand in front of the stakeholders or stand in front of my learners, for both of those cases in the past, that connection was core. Yes, I have to have that drive. But nowadays, I cannot stand in front of them if I'm not equipped with data, because that's what's needed to have the conversation go in the right direction. Otherwise, we're depending on kind of, measuring the wind on what do we think or hope this might mean if we're equipped with the data, if we know that we looked at the right data sets that are showing us the right things, we can depend more that the decisions we're making are going to be data informed. And that's the term I like to use, data informed, not data based. I don't think data should be making decisions for us, but I think we should be equipped with that data. So what drives people to our field is what I think needs to be the factor that drives people into our field. It's just what we need to equip ourselves with. And if that was in the past, reading a lot of books in that area, which I think, all enjoy, now gets added that element. Hey, we need to be very comfortable with figuring things out from large data sets, and that way better informing our decision.
So, where do you get your industry news?
Where do I get my industry news? Yeah, it's kind of a hard question because by me mentioning it and then not mentioning something, I'm certain I'm going to remember something I missed and miss the opportunity to give credit where credit is due. But reality of the fact is there are several sources. I'm happy to be able to participate on a council for the conference board, and the conference board as an organization is really great when it comes to both giving interfaces to talk to other real people who are in similar roles as I am, but as well as kind of consolidating wider industry trends, statistics, news, data, and those kinds of things. So I very much rely on a lot of what is being shared through those channels. But on the flip side, of course, there are sources like Gartner or Bersen or Red Thread Research, for example, is one of the sources that I find particularly interesting. And then I don't want to forget it because it's kind of something that helps me actually get into this career. and focus on learning and development. And that's, of course, ATD, that I think still stays as one of the solid sources for understanding the learning and development space.
That's a great list. And I agree with ATD is a great source. I'm a big volunteer with ATD in many different chapters. And I do love that you were listing news that's outside our industry first, because you're trying to keep current with what's happening in the entire arena, not just in L&D, staying relevant in your company outside of L&D.
Absolutely. Because again, that's another aspect that I think it's both a challenge and extremely important one at the same time for many of the learning and development organization. And again, perhaps beginning to be boring, but I'm connecting it to that shift towards addressing entire organizations, helping with upskilling, reskilling, and focusing on skill development. I think more than ever, it is important for learning organizations to align goals with the corporate strategy. Yes, learning organizations always try to do that, but in the past, we were more perceived, okay, we're going to make sure that the foundation for actually implementing that strategy is there. That's our job. Our job has radically expanded from that spot, because not only we're there to provide that foundation so that people have the right skill for implementing the strategy, we're actually targeting right skill in right cases to even allow people to come up with the business strategy that actually makes sense. So all the way shifting to that, there was always, like, when I look at learning and development as an area, sometimes it's considered as, part of more general HR area. In another cases, it's a completely different things. And that's sometimes due to organizational shifts and whatnot. But what I like to say is the old mantra: learning and development should have a seat at the strategic table. But what that seat nowadays means is more so not really being that seat so that we can quickly address the requests that anyone else is having, which sometimes that seat on that table, and now is no, we're actually bringing the information that can be factor in deciding the strategy. Because if I'm thinking of several options where I can move certain business function to bringing a new product, doubling down on an existing product, or doing some of those shifts. And I know that some of those shifts might require upskilling or reskilling for associates who operate in those functions. I can also use that current data on existing skills and skill gaps to even inform that decision. And not saying those decisions should be made based off which one has least effort in learning, but I think knowing what that looks like is going to provide for a better decision. And that's what I think our learning and development seat on the corporate strategy table looks like.
Very good food for thought there. I think that you're on definitely that's where we should be focusing our effort. Okay, last question, and I can guess it's going to be from one of three authors. What is one book that you would recommend for someone wanting to become a learning leader?
Well, I think that learning leader needs to dare to lead. And that's one of my favorite Brené Brown books. So definitely recommend to everyone. And I think obviously it's widely applicable for leader in any role. But I think putting vulnerability first is what makes us achieve great results with other people. And that's what leadership is.
That's a great book recommendation. No one can ever go wrong reading Brene Brown, and Dare to Lead is, of course, her signature book. So, thank you so much, Tomislav, for coming on our podcast today. As a thank you to you, I would like to plant 5 trees in your name. That's our charity at Training Pros. We plant trees around the world. We've planted 4,000 trees to date around the world in partnership with a reforestation company. So I'll send you a certificate to letting you know where the trees were planted in your name.
That's awesome. That's such a nice thing to do, Leanne. I'm very much passionate about our environment and trees are what allows us to breathe, and that's like the baseline foundation of what we all need to be able to then do great things
That's
for us.
great.
And thank you so much for having me here, Leanne.
Oh, completely my pleasure. You've given us a lot of great information, and um, it's going to be very interesting podcast when we launch this for everyone to hear. Um, thank you for tuning in to Learning Leader Spotlight this week, and be sure and join us next week to hear from another learning leader.